trying to reshoot this in a timely manner. This is a suggestion video of how to improve your transition into RN, improve your skills basically, generally. Whether you're a nursing student, new grad nurse like my daughter, starting out nurse, or even an established nurse and you want to just, hone things a little bit, or you're finding you're having difficulty with your shift, handling the patients or what have you. The universal truth for nurses is that we need time. Time is an underwriting denominator for everything. Everything we do is measured in time. Okay? There's some factor of time to everything, even meds, right? Giving meds a certain time, you give it at certain rates over time, you're giving it how many times a day, how often, there's dosages and whatever, and then the actual chemicals, yeah, but time is always a factor. Procedures, when do you want to do it? How often do you want to do it? Does that have to be done before a shift? And before shift ends? How much are you paid? It's all a matter of time. How many patients you have versus your shift time is probably an direct function of how difficult your shift is. You got 8 patients over 12 hours. That's difficult. You got 4 patients over 12 hours. It's a lot easier, right? It's all a function of time, though. You cannot affect your shift time. 12 hours. You got 12 hours, that's what you got. Right? You got to do everything in that time frame. If you don't, you're attacking it at the end. You've got to add on time. Your time, post-shift time, an hour, 2 hours, whatever. I suggest tacking it on the pre-shift time. I asked my daughter, she was having some issues with her onboarding, orientation, and she was complaining that she didn't have time to read the notes. Sometimes, she doesn't know what's going on. Eliminating the factor that I don't agree with how she's being trained. Okay, let's just address her complaint directly. I say to her, when do you get in to shift? And she says, I get in a half hour earlier. And I said, that's not enough then. She's like, what? I was like, how's that working out for you? I was like, you do the same thing over and over and you get the same outcome, a shitty outcome. Are you insane? Or is the rest of the world insane? By definition, you're insane. Change how you approach things. Okay? I said this to a nurse recently, and I said it to my daughter. I was like, oh, you're only dating idiots, huh? You're dating dirtbags or whatever. Why don't you change your fishing pool? Not your fishing pole, not your lure, but where you're fishing. If you're only fishing this type of guy, and we're just talking, it could be girls, it could be guy, girl, it doesn't matter. You're only fishing this little pond, you're only going to get that kind of fish. And she was like, oh, I'm going to change the bait. I said, good, try that. I'll tell you right now, it's not going to work, but you can go and try that. Because the fish don't care. Okay? We don't care. This fish don't care. I'll bite the bait that I want, yes. But if I'm hungry enough, I'll bite any bait, right? That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You have to fish in the pool that's suiting you. You can't drop your lure in the lake and expect to pull out a clownfish. Or I guess if you drop your lure into the shallows of the coral reef and you pull out a clownfish, you shouldn't be surprised. You want a trout, you want to go to the lake, right? That's a better analogy. I don't know anything about fishing. My girlfriend's she fishes with her father. That's she's probably better at that. But you've got to change what you're doing. In other words, right? You've got to approach it differently. Don't get me wrong. A lot of nurses don't need that extra pre-time. And a lot of them tend to be veteran nurses and well respected. And I see Gen Zers, a lot of new nurses, not even Gen Zers, but new nurses look at that and they see that. It's whether they're preceptor or whatever, and they respect that. They think that means they're a good nurse. Not necessarily so. There are nurses that come in I have a friend I call 701. And Juan tends to come in at 702, 701, 703, whatever, He's a very good nurse. One of the best nurses I know. And he does that. And he takes handoff. I call them blunt crayon nurses because they take their notes with a blunt crayon. Whereas I've noticed PICU nurses, especially, I don't know why, they take notes in tiny little script, tiny little print, and it looks like they're typing it out somehow. I'm looking at them, I'm like, I'm looking at it, I'm like, you have the neatest handwriting. And then I look at her friend, and I was like, oh, you fucking people are crazy. You're writing in Gothic script. It's Times Roman. How do you do that by hand? But they're neat, and they come in early. They take their notes. They're very diligent, right? Juan doesn't give a shit. I had a preceptor. Didn't give a shit. She'd like, what's my assignment? She'd write it on a napkin and get her pastry, and then 7:30 rolls around. Then she's okay. Now I can work. I had my coffee, I had my pastry, I can work. One of the better nurses, not one of the best nurses, one of the better nurses I know. All right. My other preceptor, she came in early, and I come in an hour early. I used to come in an hour and a half early. I'd scare that preceptor. She come in early, an hour, and she'd be like, you're already here. I was going to tell you maybe you ought to come in early to take notes. It was like one of our first or second shifts, and she was like, never mind. She's like, never mind. I'm not going to say anything. And very quickly, I went through her preceptorship, and like halfway through, she wouldn't even look in on me. I was like, I don't walk too far away. And she spent the shift talking to her friend, and she yelled down, you need me for anything? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. And they're like, oh, I like having Ray as, their friends are like, I like you having Ray as a preceptor. You can help me. It's like 2 hours running around. And they just shit around all day. But when we came time to talk and go over stuff, we would sit down and talk. And the educator we have now actually would look over our shoulders and take notes, because she was relatively a new nurse now. Now she's our unit educator, and she really appreciated that, learning from my preceptor and watching how we interacted. And she did her preceptees that same exact way. She's literally taking notes, and then she'd run back to her preceptee. Okay, we're gonna do this, and then whatever. But preparation was the key that made that easy for me, easier. All right. It took me 2.5 years to really get comfortable. Most nurses on average takes 2 years, is what I said. And I think on the internet, you'll see most people think it's 2 years as an average. I've seen people do it in a year or so. I've seen people take 2 years. I've seen people never make the adjustment. And there are some people that took longer. It took me about 2.5 years. I have no qualms in saying that. But new nurses, new Gen Zer nurses, they see that extra time in the beginning, especially, as sacrosanct. They're like, absolutely not. I was like, why? I'm not doing it for free. My training, just for my daughter. I said, why? You're paying for your training. She's like, what? I said, you're in a BSN program. You're paying for that. I mean, yes, company's reimbursing you, but you're fronting the money, and anything that's short, you're paying, right? She's like, yeah. So you're paying for your time, and you're doing it off time too, like an off day. So on the day you're working, you're not willing to give an extra half hour to make your shift easier. And that's the key. I said to her, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about you giving the man free money. This is about making your shift easier. Because if you're not prepared and you go into your shift, guess what? It's still your patient. Nobody's going to want to hear, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what I'm doing, blah, blah. Figure it out. This one, and it's a mark against you then, because you're not learning. Because that's what you're onboarding. You're supposed to be learning. I said to her, I said, you're my daughter. I love you, but you got to be doing this. Everybody did it. You got to do it. This is not impossible stuff. You're just not willing to put in the time beforehand. But guess what? If you fuck up and you got a chart, you got to finish before you leave, right? She's like, yeah. So you're willing to do it at the end. You're willing to give up an hour, hour and a half, because I've seen you that late. You got no qualms about doing that. And you got to go back the next day. How's that working for you? How's that? I was like, I've never understood that. Blunted crayon pencils, or blunted crayon nurses can be good. I find the majority tend to be very good. Preceptors, nurses that I know. I have one nurse that I know consistently showed up even before me at an hour and a half. She still does. Another one came 2 hours earlier, but she would also stay like an hour and a half later and give long reports. She stayed like 14, 15 hours every day. Every day. It was tearful. I remember certain nurses, when they found out they had to give her report, they would start crying because they knew that was the time. It didn't matter, it was updates. They knew X amount, and they would literally, I saw, why is Jen crying? She's got to give a report to, Jan. Oh. I was like, oh, what are you going to do? That was the way she worked. And honestly, Jan, not her real name, obviously, was a marginal nurse. So it doesn't mean you're going to be a great nurse. Some of the other ones were great nurses, no problem. Some of the best nurses I know take that much time because they want to know everything about the patient. And then they want their shift to be that much easier. Because when I come in an hour early and, I have that hour to give to really learn, unless I'm floated, then I have 30 minutes or something like that. But I have that hour to prepare for the patients. It makes my shift that much easier. And that's why I explained to my daughter is, I'm not giving the man any extra time. If anything, I'm very, very rarely over. 7:45, if I'm not out the door, it's late for me. Because I give, the patients usually are well rested, had a good shift, and that makes the next nurse's shift easier and the handoff that much easier. Sometimes it's 7:15, 7:20. It depends how quickly you can talk. All right, you can talk like an auctioneer. Done. How quickly they could take notes. I always have to take a glance and say, are you keeping up? Okay. Want me to talk slower? I can talk slower. I can ramble. I can ramble like crazy. You guys know that. But typically, you want to get through your handoffs, your either way, on either end, right? Quickly. If you come in earlier, maybe you can get it earlier. And then the nurse is that much easier. I'll tell you another thing that's good about coming in early. If there's anything needed to be done and you're checking the say, hey, this wasn't done. They're like, yeah, this person needs this order. Can you get it? You're still the nurse of record. Till 7 o'clock rolls by. Until 7 p.m., and they're the nurse. I say, yeah. You're supposed to get this at 5. Yeah, some of them just kind of drag it. So like, it's your nurse. You're the nurse now. It's yours. Hot potato. Bye. No. Get that order. Get the order. I tell them, I said, get the order. Draw it. I said, what are you doing? It was on your shift. The order wasn't put in at 6:50. 6:50, 6:30, I don't bother. That was 4:30. Or I've seen orders, it's 9:30 this morning. Yo, get that order, get it done. You're staying. I'm not getting it. So that's another benefit of coming in early, calling the other nurse out on that, because that shit does happen. It makes your time, your 12 hours though, that much more pristine and easy to handle. You get your meds in a row, you get your procedures in a row, you get your time, you can prioritize your patients. She only has 1 or 2 patients. My daughter only has 1 or 2 patients. She's ICU. But you still have a lot to do. You got to plan. Oh, you're going to change the dialysis cartridge. You got to give blood twice. You got to draw the labs, this, and this. You got to change this drip. How much you have left? What do you think? What's the calculation on the time? It's going to be 8:30 when that runs out. Let's have the med ready. It's coming up from pharmacy. Oh my God. Yeah, okay. You guys tubed it to the other hospital and they're going to run it over, right? Is that what the hell? Well, it's taking so long. All this stuff matters because you're running around like a chicken with its head chopped off during those 12 hours. If you can handle a lot of that beforehand, this 12 hours becomes a lot easier and gives you the time to look over things that are missed. There have been times it's like, wait a minute, speech approves honey thick. Why is he in thin liquids? You never know. It's like, wait a minute, why are we giving this med? They're allergic, anaphylactically. It happens. Things happen. If you have the time to look, you have the time to pick that up. Because otherwise you're just like, that was on the record. Yeah, you're right. It was on the record. But you really want to fill out the paperwork? Blunted crayon nurses are good in a certain way, but they're also bad in a certain way because they have this unattainable standard that these new nurses try to strive for. And I remember being tempted by it, but I was like, no, I need this time. My girlfriend is a blunted crayon nurse. She was like, what the fuck is that? I was like, it means you don't even peel off the paper at the end. And it's got all different kind of colors. Your red has got green and blue chips on it. And you don't give a hoot. But you could still do your job very well. She's one of the best nurses I know. Okay? She is. In NICU, she's absolutely brilliant, smart, tough cookie. She knows, she's interdisciplinary too. She's a respiratory and a certified nurse, NICU nurse. Very, very talented. But she's a blunt crayon nurse. She's just like, okay, yeah, I'll take those. Okay. That's right, I can still read this. Right? Mine are folded up nicely. I got one sheet for every patient. It's set. Okay, I'm OCD, but it works for me. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you and you're a blunt crayon nurse, that's great. But if you're finding you're having trouble with your shift, you're finding you don't have enough time to adjust, you find yourself not growing as a nurse, afford yourself that extra time, either beforehand or after time, whatever, in between the shift. If you do it well enough, you're gonna have time, you're gonna find you have time during the shift. And I watch nursing videos. My manager caught me one time. She's like, what are you watching? I'm like, I'm watching nursing videos. Same ones, right? Not mine videos, but like I think it was Simplified Nursing, or maybe Sarah, is registered nurse, and she was like, oh, I watch the same ones. But I was like sitting for a violent patient. They're like, well, what? I was like, they ripped out the sink. And she's like, she stared at me. She's like, what? She came in at like 4 o'clock trying to catch us doing something. I'm like, yeah, that sink there. She just turned around and walked away. She's like, my shift hasn't started yet. She's like, oh my God, because she's the manager. She's a unit manager. She's gonna have to deal with that with plant engineering. She's like, I'll deal with that when the sun's up. And I was like, bye. Have fun. I'm clocking out still at 7. Not my problem. He's my patient. I don't think he was even my patient, that patient. I was just sitting there watching. I was just, because I was like, I'm just, because we don't have a sitter. She's like, oh, go watch your videos, right? She like ran off. She's like, I'm going back to my office downstairs. Bye. But that happens. But you have time during shift. If you become comfortable enough with your craft, then you can carve out time. Right now, my daughter she cries. Sometimes she says, I don't have time to eat lunch. I said, that's because you're still learning. You don't know enough to carve out. Also, your preceptor hasn't sacrosanct cut that out. The few times I do precept, that's what was taught to me by my preceptor. That is sacrosanct time. I don't practice for myself. I can go 24 hours, 28 hours without eating. I've done that. It's just, being the parent, But for my kids or my preceptee, no. For people I'm mentoring, no. You take your lunch, I'll watch the people, but learn to carve out time for yourself. A well-fed nurse is a good nurse, right? But if you cannot find that time, make the time is what I'm saying. Prepare it. Because in the end, you are going to stay late and chart and finish charting. And your preceptor's going to be pissed because they have to stay with you if they're good preceptors. They're supposed to. Sign off on that. So they can't leave until you're done charting if you're being precepted. And your nurse manager is going to be like pissed off because you didn't finish your charting until, if you're established nurse or a little further along out of precept, until your chart's updated. The doctors are going to be pissed off because they're like, where's the charting for this time? I'm still entering. No, they don't want to hear that. You know, you have time to do it within your shift. You just didn't prepare enough. Don't try to be a blunt crayon nurse if you're not. The great nurses can do that. The ones that don't give a hoot can do that. If you give a hoot about your patients, about your career, about your license, put in a little extra time. It's better to pay it here, half hour here, than an hour or two there and have 12 hours of shit. That's my point. That's why I try to impress upon my daughter. She might unsubscribe. She might be really pissed off. She's like, another lecture? I got to tune into your videos for a lecture, Dad? But you ask me or you complain to me about what you can do to improve your craft, how to get this time. This is how you do it. Time is the underwriting factor that determines how good of a nurse you are. It determines when you are able to really be independent, because then they can trust you to handle your assignment adequately within a reasonable amount of time, because they don't like paying you overtime. Some places won't. They're like, no, that's your problem. But most of them do. But, you know, after a certain amount of time of overtime, the manager's going to have to speak with you, you know. So just consider it out there. I know a lot of Gen Zers, a lot of new nurses, they don't want to do that. Some people can't. They have family commitments. I understand that. But that is an option. If you can, put a little extra time in the beginning. Come in a half hour early, come in an hour early, and see how that does. Does it improve your game? Does you have time to read the notes, to go over, look over the patients, you know, interact a little bit with the tech and the nurse before you. I always like talking to the tech before me, as well as the nurse, obviously. But I always say, so how was your night? How was your day, you know? And they're like, oh, yeah, da. It's a little extra knowledge. Sometimes the nurse doesn't know that. And they're like, oh. I was like, no, not according to the tech. They're like, what? I was like, you don't talk to your tech? I talk to my tech all the time. That's another tip, mini tip. This one's really about time. Think about going in a little early. All right, good luck.